Welcome. Officially, we are so glad you're here with us this afternoon. We appreciate your taking time out of your busy days. And I'm so excited to be here with our guest. But I'm going to take just a quick minute to introduce myself. I'm Christine Murray. I am the lead pedagogy and product specialist at Becker's School Supplies. And Rachel is not able to be here with us today, but many of you know her, and she is our early learning, inclusion, and environment specialist. For those of you that are new to Becker's as an organization, we are a longstanding partner of early learning programs, and our role as an education team is to amplify how we support you, make sure we are providing resources that are helpful to programs and teachers and program leaders, and just do our best to show up for the field in a way that acknowledges the challenges and offers the resources and support that we need. So today's session, at the very end, we will offer a QR code and a link that will take you to an evaluation. It's a Microsoft form that you'll fill out a few short questions, and at the end, you will get a prompt that will click on a link that will take you to a PDF where you'll enter your name into a certificate that you can then save or print out. So that is how you'll receive your certificate. You have to first access the evaluation, and that will, once it's submitted, it'll prompt you to go to a certificate link. The recording and all the resources, including the slide deck, are going to be shared at our Resource Cafe, our webinar landing page. So you'll be able to access everything that you'll see on the screen today. If you miss a note or a QR code or the evaluation or anything, no worries. It will be available for you. And finally, I'm so thrilled to introduce today's guest, Amy Chiu. She is an experienced classroom teacher, an administrator, an educator of educators. I love teacher educators, and a professional learning facilitator. And when we were thinking about inviting her to partner with us for a webinar or podcast, her messaging just resonated so deeply. Her commitment to developmentally appropriate practice, to really honoring children's own wisdom about their pace and their development, and how teachers and programs can kind of just cultivate a mindset of making space for this, all based in research and the practical everyday actual living experiences with children in schools and programs. And Amy is the founder of the Work of Play. So we will share the link to that website and her Instagram and other LinkedIn pages. That is the space where she develops amazing resources, if you haven't had a chance to see them previously, that support educators and programs in bringing this intention to all of the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Christine. Awesome. So is it time for me to share my screen? Let me go ahead and do that. And just a moment, because I can't see that there. Here we go. So thank you, everyone. So thank you so much for the warm introduction and welcome. This is such an interesting topic for me and something that I started diving into only recently. My name is Amy Chiu. I am based out of Los Angeles, and I love working in early childhood education. It's been almost nearly 20 years that I have been in this field. And like Christine said, I started out as a classroom teacher, moved into school administration, and now I'm teaching in college. And I work with schools and educators to slow down their practice so that we can be more responsive to the children we care for, because there are certain things that are coming to a head right now in this fast, fast world that we live in. And for me, I really had to reckon with this when I experienced my own burnout as an educator several years ago, to the point where I had to leave that job with no backup plan because I was severely burned out. And, all the symptoms were there, but I kept ignoring them until it was too late. I just didn't have anything left in my own tank. So, how could I be there for my staff, our families, and the children that we serve? And so for me, this is a deeply personal topic. And I think for many of us, this story resonates because it's certainly not mine alone. I hear so many educators so stressed out, so at their wits' end. And I know all of us enter this field to impart our love of learning to our students. But along the way, when systems continue to not work, when we continue to prioritize speed over relationships, over meaningful, deep engagement, we're really robbing children of this lovely, joyful experience that they can start having in early childhood. At the same time, too, we're robbing ourselves of the joy of teaching. And then so many of us become managers of children because again, I want to point to some systemic issues that are so prevalent in education today and see if there are any tweaks that we can make in our lives so that we can be more intentional in our teaching practice, so that we can sustain our work because at the end of the day, we are role models for children. And sometimes I wonder, what are they actually learning from us, right? It's not the lessons that we teach them necessarily, but it's how we live our lives day in and day out in the classroom and at home, and how that trickles into the children's lives and sets the tone for what they think life is. So today, I invite all of us to examine our relationship with time. Slow pedagogy for me isn't just about slowing down and doing less. It's really about finding time to do what matters most and to reclaim that trust in ourselves as teachers and also in the children and in their natural development. And in doing so, I think we also bring presence back into our work. So, this is the agenda for today. We'll do a grounding and connection ritual. We'll talk about what slow pedagogy is, the barrier, which is the culture of speed, why rushing undermines learning, and what slow pedagogy looks like in practice. And then we'll have a closing reflection and a call to presence, and we'll do a Q&A at the end and a resource share. So I like to start with this ritual of a body scan ritual. So let's just take a breath together and notice one thing your body is telling you. So, if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze. I like to put one hand over my heart and another one over my belly and just start noticing what my body's telling me, where you're holding tension and where that is coming from. Has it tension been there for a long time? So anywhere you're holding tension, I invite you to send a little bit of warmth there, a little bit of love, because what we're doing here too, it's not just about slowing down. It's about self-compassion and tapping into that compassion for ourselves so that we then have a well of compassion for others. And knowing that life is challenging, teaching is hard, and every day can be full of struggle, but that we at the center of all are human and we must remember that. Remember our humanity and all that we do and all that we show children, because at the end of the day, it's not about getting the best grades, it's not about completing the curriculum. It's really about our relationships to children, to families, to our colleagues and loved ones, and most importantly, with ourselves. Let's take one last deep breath together and we'll come back to our webinar. Okay. So I know the days are so busy. This is a practice I return to when I start feeling overwhelmed, when I start feeling like I don't have enough time This is precisely when I need to take that pause to recenter myself, to remind myself why I'm here, why I'm doing this, and to remember that even if we don't feel great today, we can certainly take steps to help ourselves, and that ripple effect will help children and the families that we serve. And so this is something I invite you to do when you're, again, when you're feeling a little bit lost, rushed in the moment, to come back to your breath and to ground yourself in the moment. And I'm sure many of us practice mindfulness with our children, and this is something I encourage all of us to do with them too, so that they can begin connecting how they feel to the reasons for that and how our feelings are embodied, how that feels in our body. And that is the beginning of social emotional learning, which is a big part of slowing down, is recognizing when we need that break, when that pause, and we honor that and take it without shame. So, what is slow pedagogy? So, I must give thanks to Allison Clark and Provo Trust for getting me started on this journey. So, this is the book that introduced me to slow practices in education. I highly recommend this book for you to read and to reread. I do have that book here, so it's not super long. But it is packed full of ideas and it's packed full of stories from practitioners from around the world. And I love that because as I was reading it, I started realizing that we're not alone in feeling this way. There is quite a movement going on, and I want us to join in and galvanize this movement and spread this message of why slowing down in education is a benefit, not only for children, but for ourselves. And so I highly recommend this as a book study. Do a book study with your teams. This is something that I would bring back to professional development or staff development and just talk about it because these continuous reflections will help us to remember that we're not alone in our struggle and that we can continue working towards um, personal wellness, which of course then impacts collective wellness. And Frobel Trust, you go to their website, there's so many wonderful resources there too. And in particular, lots of videos for you to view about slow practices in classrooms in different communities around the world. So that would be a great starting point if you're brand new to this. So, one value of slow pedagogy is the value of childhood in itself. This is a Frobelian value as well as one of their core values. And so this is something that I think some of us have forgotten, that childhood in itself, it's its own foundational time, not a time to rush through, not a time for merely preparing children for their future. That childhood itself, and let's look at nature, it's a foundational time to grow strong foundations, grow strong roots in who we are and how we engage with the world. But these days, we're rushing children through this childhood. I want us to think back to our own childhood, and my own childhood was many decades ago. But I am so privileged. I had a slower childhood. I remember days of just roaming the neighborhood with my sibling, with my cousins, uh, without a parent hovering. And we had so much time in the world to explore, to discover, to find our own adventures. And these stories are going away because childhood these days has been accelerated. And so I want us to remember that childhood in itself is a foundational time for us to not rush through this because then we're inadvertently derailing the children from deeper engagement and learning. We are also hurting ourselves and them by applying so much pressure and stress around what should be a joyful experience, the experience of learning, something that comes naturally to children, but as they grow up, it tends to wane this interest in learning, and that is tragic. I want to quickly mention Rebecca Winthrop. She wrote a book about the disengaged teen. I haven't read it yet, but I have followed some of her research and I've watched some of her videos. But she has research that shows how children's interest in school wanes very quickly from the middle school years onward. And I want us to change that trajectory. Early childhood education can be so joyful, but when we forget to incorporate lots of play, lots of open-ended time to explore. And when every school day is tightly segmented into tiny chunks of time, it's not allowing children to have this slow childhood that some of us have had before. So let's keep that in mind as we move through this session. And slow pedagogy introduced me to the idea of being with children. So I think for us teachers, there's this tendency to do. And we certainly plan so much. We plan curriculum, we plan our environments, we plan how we're going to introduce a topic and how we're going to extend that curriculum. But along the way, we have to remember that every school day is full of surprises. And so it's impossible to predict how any school day will go for me. I have a certain skeleton of a plan, but I make sure that I leave lots of open room because I want to not only do to children, which we can tend to overdo, but I want to show them that just spending time together, being with them, there's a value in that too. So I selected two photos here to kind of situate us into some common school scenarios. So I think for me as a teacher, right, I'm always trying to identify those teachable moments. And in any school day, there are many teachable moments. And sometimes I think, okay, I can certainly interject while this child is reading this book here, so engrossed in this book. I can certainly interject with something I know that he might not be aware of. But also, I'm practicing slowing down because I also understand now he's thinking, he has his own process going on. Sometimes they do share it with us and they're children with some language and they can communicate their ideas with us and we're listening. But oftentimes, too, this is an interior process that we're not privy to unless we really hone our observation skills and skills of listening so that we can attune to what's happening and notice its inherent richness rather than trying to control it by interjecting what I think he should be learning right now. And this picture on the right, they're playing with dinosaurs. They're creating lots of stories. I'm sitting nearby. I'm watching, listening. Sometimes I take notes. But I do wait for a cue to enter children's play because I also want to hold this time as sacred for them. This unstructured playtime, we've been conditioned to think that it's not useful, it's not helpful for their future when in fact it is the very foundation of childhood and how children learn best. So I want us to take a stance that sometimes it is okay to simply be with children. So I want to share this quick story. One time for a period of time, I was subbing at different centers and I just show up because they needed me and I would come into the classroom and be with the children. And so what I typically do is I go to the floor because that's where children are and I'm hanging out with them. And then I did get feedback from the teacher that was in the classroom. She kind of pulled me aside and she said, um, listen, you're sitting a lot. We should be doing more with the children. And so it made me think that, to someone who might not understand my intention, it looks like I'm not doing very much. Maybe I could be labeled lazy, but it's important that we share our intention with other educators so that they know there's a purpose to why even sitting with children is a value. So, it's not just about being with children too. I think along the way, we are having to educate other adults. Children are never telling me to speed up or hurry up. They have their own natural pace, which naturally is slower than that of an adult because they haven't been conditioned yet to rush. And so I want us to remember that simply being with children is actually quite insightful and that we don't have to worry that they're not learning because they are in fact learning. And I love this idea of going off track with children. Like I said, every school day is full of surprises for me. I never know what's going to come up. And I want us to be open to going off track with children because oftentimes these unexpected threads of curiosity, they lead to really, really deep engagement and meaningful learning that lasts far longer than something that we can pre-plan. And so these photos here, you can tell a child is punching holes in a leaf. So I had set up this table outside for them to freely explore hole punches and paper. But instead, this child picked up a leaf and started punching holes in it. And I was completely amazed because it never occurred to me that you could do that. And so this is what I mean about going off track is like, let's stay open to what children show us and then recognize the creativity, the innovation, all of these things that are 21st century skills that we must foster or at least get out of the way so they don't diminish in the children through conditioning by adults. So going off track here was wonderful because she got to punch a lot of leaves. I thought it was amazing. Her friends noticed, they came over, they started doing a lacing activity all on their own. So I find this quite magical. I certainly didn't plan this. I had no idea it was going to happen, but I'm really glad that it did and that I took a detour with the children. I shelved my plans. I took a detour with the children so we could follow this thread of interest. I have another story about going off track here. So, at this time, I was working as a director in a preschool program where we had a lot of outdoor time. And so there was a lot of rich relationships that the children and the people cultivated with our natural environment. And so we had an apple tree there. And one day, one of the teachers saw this apple here on the left fallen on the ground and noticed all these marks, right? And so it would have been easy for this teacher to simply throw this apple away. Okay, all right, it's falling on the ground, it's trash. Instead, she brought it back to the children with this question: what happened to this apple? And that opened up amazing, rich conversation full of ideas and theories. And actually, the children, because they were so familiar with this environment, they immediately said, I think it's our squirrel that, got this apple and tried to eat it and dropped it on the ground. And so it became an inquiry, and it lasted for a whole week. And it certainly wasn't planned, but again, going off track opens up to new opportunities. And what we want isn't for our curriculum to be the best. We want to foster deep engagement no matter what, whether it comes from us, sometimes it will, and whether it comes from the children. We want to be open to all manners of curiosity and engagement. So we must address the barrier, which is the culture of speed. I know that this is so prevalent in the US, but I also hear educators from around the world feeling this too, the pressure to speed up in our classrooms. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why we may speed up. Some of us are rushing to developmental milestones. So I have some experience in infant classrooms. I love sort of the unhurried nature of that infant classroom. Generally speaking, in my experience, I've noticed that in the infant classroom, children's individual schedules are honored, right? They're not all on the same mealtime schedule, same nap schedule. So they're able to follow their own rhythms and their own pace, their own pace of development. But something happens right around one, and I've noticed this. We start trying to get them on the same schedule. Certainly, it's out, for our own convenience. I understand that, but that's when we start to see that development that we're accelerating it because we're trying to get them on the same schedule. I know there's also too, there's tendency, we have the ages and stages framework, and some, pediatricians tell us what to look for and how babies are supposed to progress throughout the first year of life. And so that can certainly raise a red flag when some of our infants and toddlers aren't getting to that milestone around that recommended age. But I also encourage us to just slow down a little bit and not jump right to that red flag. Of course, consult with your pediatrician or consult with specialists, But I think a lot of times we're just trying to be the first. We're trying to make children be the first because we have this, we're equating it with being the best. And we're creating sort of, that's the benchmark for all the other children to follow. And I really want us to be wary of that, because that's when that acceleration starts happening. And throughout the years, it only speeds up. We have to talk about the idea of school readiness. Right now, it's by an adult timeline, and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure. I've worked in preschools for so many years. There's a lot of pressure for teachers to get their kids ready for elementary school. I get that. It's not just coming from our admins, it's coming from our families, maybe from other educators. And so we feel like, all right, this is the time, we got to get the kids ready. And so we're rushing them. But what's happening is then we're not actually fostering deep learning and engagement. We're, going by that checklist, that piece of paper that doesn't reflect the full spectrum of how children develop and grow. And so when we do that too, we're inadvertently robbing them of the joy of learning. And, so many of us do see busyness as productivity. I used to be this way. I wore it like a badge of honor. I was so proud of how much I was able to do in one day until I realized it wasn't sustainable. And so, I really think we have to reframe what that is. And for us to now, when we think about productivity, remember that rest is part of productivity, right? It's not just go, go, go. We can't do that. We're not machines. We have to build in restorative rest so that we can be productive. And so what's happening is so many of us are feeling chronic stress with no time to recover. And so, day in, day out, operating like this is really diminishing our love of teaching. It's diminishing our love of building community in the classroom, to listen to every voice, because we're in a rush, we're hurried, and we're stressed out, we're managing behaviors. And so, again, these are some of the common barriers. Now, I don't have a solution for these barriers, but I think that some of these practices that I'll be talking about today will address that. And hopefully, with small incremental changes, we will begin to see a shift in our culture. Culture of speed. So there's a lot of tension here. I'm going to just read this. There's a lot of tension between developmental needs and institutional expectations. Children need time. Institutions can value speed and efficiency. Children need movement, and adults can expect stillness. Now, I know this isn't exactly tied to slow pedagogy, but I wanted to mention this because what we're thinking, I think what a lot of adults tend to think is learning looks quiet, learning looks like eye contact with a teacher, when we know in reality, the way children learn, they must move, they must have movement in their day, throughout their day, not just movement breaks here and there. They really do require movements throughout the day to be able to learn. They need co-regulation, and sometimes we can expect independence because we're rushing them to it again. And independence, of course, we want them to gain independence, but I think so many of us have unrealistic expectations of what that looks like at every age, at 2, at 3, at 4, and so on. And so I want us to remember that we set the tone, we set the emotional temperature of the classroom, and for us to first focus on our own nervous system so that we can be that role model for children. And children need play, whereas school can prioritize academic preparation. And I hope that most of us here understand that this is not a dichotomy, right? This is play is learning, play is academic preparation. We just have to become more skilled at explaining it to others, to other adults. And children need trust and choice, whereas some of us can focus on compliance. And I get it because I think some of us are just so at our wits' end. We're trying to do everything throughout the day, but we really do have to begin from choice and trust because children are wired to seek autonomy at this age. And so we must meet that need for autonomy. And rushing undermines learning, right? Children learn best when they feel safe, adults too. So I want us to look at these 3 quotes. Stress narrows the brain's capacity to learn. Dr. Bruce Perry. We know this, and there is a plethora of research that supports this that when we're stressed, when we add so much pressure, children are not in that learning mode. They're in a state of stress, fight or flight. And so we have to remember that when the day is stressful day in and day out, even for us, we pass off our stress onto the children. No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship, Dr. James Comer. I know we often talk about relationships as the foundation of our classroom community, but I also wonder, are we practicing this daily? Do children feel heard, listened to, and understood? Um, are we able to talk to our colleagues about our struggles and feel empathy, right? So we really do have to remember that relationships underscore our effectiveness as educators. And lastly, as a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another, in hearing one another's voices, in recognizing one another's presence. Bell hooks. This is the kind of classroom community I want. And I think so many of us strive for this. So let's figure out what's getting in the way of having a classroom community like this. So here is a poll question. Where do you notice a sense of rushing in your day with children? And I know not all of you are in classroom environments, but go ahead and just select one of these reasons, one of these times where you do feel that rush in your day.
Great. Yeah, folks are chiming in. Please feel free to reply. I feel such a change in my body, Amy, already from our
Oh,
little check-in to just these few minutes of hearing just your voice and your thoughts and your stories. It's really
thanks,
noticeable.
Christine. Yes, I love sharing stories, and I know so many of us have stories where we have tried slowing down. I think the more we share that and the more that we recognize that it's an imperfect process, the more willing we are to try, I think, because, it's not about perfection. It's not about changing the whole entire system all at once. It's about identifying our first step.
Right. I'll go ahead and end the poll, Amy, and then we can be able to see the results, I think.
All right. So, mornings, arrivals, transitions, 35% of you who've responded. Yes, transitions. We'll talk about that too. And 17% of you said all of the above. So, okay, this really shows me that, it's time that we revisit our practices, that we talk to our colleagues, talk to our admins, talk to our families about the benefits of slowing down because, change won't happen overnight. We do have to start that conversation today. Thank you so much for participating. Okay. So I want to just show you some other ways I invite slowness into my practice. So remember to value the present moment. Just remember childhood has value in itself. So I want to just share a quick story about this photo on the left here. So this is a 3-year-old. She had just started preschool, and she did a lot of mark making. And here she is admiring a book that she made. Okay, where she is the author. So I mean, I really appreciate this moment because I saw the pride that she had on her face and her whole body, the joy that she felt in revisiting her work. And I know sometimes it can be tempting for us to jump in here and say, okay, but what's next? When is she going to write her name? And I want us to remember that these moments are so fleeting. We don't need to rush them. These moments are already so fleeting. Before long, she was writing her name. But I want us to remember the value in these moments here and not to rush them to the next stage, to enjoy it, to be witness to it, to partner with them and share that love of learning. Because remember, we want to keep their love of learning intact so that that interest continues to grow over the years. And we want to attune to children's pace and rhythm. So I also think that sometimes in our systems, we've built in so many transitions, or we've created such short, small chunks of time to explore it that it's really hard for children to get into that exploration because they don't have enough time. Angela Hanscom said that it takes about 45 minutes for children to really settle into a play scenario. And if you think about your daily schedule, do you have 45 minutes of uninterrupted play for children? And if you don't, what can you do to build in more time for them to do that? Because when they're allowed to have that extended time, their learning goes deep. Okay. None of this is planned, but they have that inherent uh, feeling of wanting to dive deeper, and they have that intrinsic motivation. We don't need to force them to learn. So, this child on the right who is making this long line of connecting Unifix cubes. Now, I wonder what would happen if a teacher had stepped in and say, "All right, you spend enough time on that. It's time to give someone else a turn," or "Stop what you're doing. We're going to group time now." Right? I understand sometimes we'll have to do that, but I also want to encourage us to hold space for these things to happen, to not interrupt the learning that is already happening. And this picture on the right is she is wrapping a branch with lots of yarn. And I remember sitting there watching her. She was working very slowly, very methodically. And I had to sit on my hands because I was getting so anxious within myself watching her and thinking, should I step in? Should I offer a cue? Should I point out what she might do instead? But I gave myself that pause and I realized that she didn't need any interjection from me at all. She was perfectly content working this out for herself, and that I didn't want to rob her of this opportunity for that self-directed learning. And we have to enable revisiting and depth. So I think there's also this tendency, if we're not careful, that, we think, oh, we're going to only do that this week, and then we're going to swap it out for something different next week. And when we just swap things out without consideration of what it means when we do that, when we do it just because it's time to, every week we do this, we're actually not giving them the chance to go deeper in their learning. So take, for example, this is a clay exploration. We'll start with this picture on the right, where, when I first offered clay, it's super open-ended. I don't even offer tools. It's simply the clay, maybe some water sometimes in a spray bottle, and they just get to openly explore. No expectation that they have to make anything. And children are perfectly fine exploring and not producing a product if they're not conditioned to do so. And then, I would keep bringing clay out at different points throughout the year. Maybe I formalize it a little bit, add another dimension like tools. And then by the end of the year, maybe they're making coil pots. But, this certainly isn't the only way I would do clay. I just wanted to show this as a way to remind us to keep bringing things back, keep bringing ideas back, because at every return, we reflect on our learning, we add new knowledge, and it's this fluid, dynamic thing, right? We never have to think like, oh, they'll be bored. They actually just go deeper in their understanding of a subject matter, of a material, of their own ideas. And we should build in buffer time and spaciousness. And so, that schedule that is so tightly packed, where can you find spaciousness? Where can you add a little wiggle room for the children, especially when they're already deeply engaged and you're looking at the clock and you think, oh, it is time to clean up and move on to something else? Can we pause in that moment, look around the classroom, and say, you know what? Let's let them continue playing because they're so engaged. It's okay to start lunch 5 minutes later, or it's okay to delay group time by 5 minutes. I want us to build in a little buffer time because what's important is the children's engagement, right? It's not just us moving them through the day. We want them to have presence during the day. Okay. And we must prioritize relationships and listening. So think back to your favorite teachers growing up. I know I can think of a couple of teachers that continue to be really meaningful for me. And I would guess that most of them were not your favorite teachers because they kept to that schedule or that they taught you anything in particular, but it was how they made you feel that They saw you, they cared about you, and they cared about your relationship. It reminds me of the Maya Angelou quote where she says, I know people will forget. I'm paraphrasing here, but people will forget what I said. They'll forget what I do, but they'll never forget how I made them feel. And I always go back to that quote, and that's the feeling I want to capture as a teacher of children, a teacher of adults. I want my students to know that it's not just about them learning and producing outcomes. It's about us being humans together and growing together. And this picture on the right, it's, we do a lot of gardening at our school here, lots of time out in nature. But I want to remind us that when we're documenting, to capture these relationships. Because sometimes, I've worked in many, many schools. Sometimes when I look at the documentation board and I see photos of children at work, and I wonder, well, where was the teacher in this? I think that when we bring the teacher back into these photos and back into the story, we can really show that this partnership is what matters, this relationship. Children don't just learn in a vacuum. They're learning because there's all these rich relationships around them. So definitely show yourself, okay, in documentation. And for us to work on designing slow environments. And again, when I think about I have to change up my whole classroom, it's too overwhelming. I'm not going to do it. So I'm just going to literally pick a corner in my classroom to work on, to have it be maybe a cozy nook for one or two. And I know some of us have these calm down corners and things like that. Although, my opinion about, calling them calm down corners, again, I think, that then it's a way to manage behavior. And I really want us to provide spaces and nooks in the classroom where children can simply just go on their own. And because they recognize that they need that moment to themselves or just one-on-one with a friend. And so slow spaces, indoors and outdoors. And really quickly, I want to talk about this picture in the middle. So this was one teacher's way of slowing down this mark making experience. So there are 3 and 4 year olds in this classroom, and the point is, I think she put on some soft music, put on these candle battery lights, and really set the vibe there. It's warm and cozy, no rush, no timers, and they could simply draw as they wish. Try something like this. Maybe a little tweak, a little addition like this in your classroom will help to slow down an experience. And don't forget, documentation and reflection is a way to offer ourselves that pause so that we can think, rethink, revise, reflect, return, relaunch, and come back to these ideas over time. And so if you're documenting, pre-literacy, literacy for your families, make sure we show the whole process of learning and not just the finished products that the children produce. Share stories about that, right? So you can kind of see a progression here on the left here, pasting of these letters, but also you can see the beginnings, right? This child wrote some letters that are in her name, so you can see the beginnings of that. This child in the middle, he's 4, and he wrote the word Legos. He was making a list, a gift list, a present list for his parents, and Legos are very meaningful to him, so he wrote that. And this child on the right is writing a little bit more. She's writing, I love you, sister, when she was missing her sister. Now, she didn't write this on her own. She had a visual aid and a teacher to guide her. But I wanted to show all the parts of pre-literacy, including all those wonderful scribbles, to show families that we value all of these stages. And meal times is ritual. So I know, so since most of you have said transitions are tricky, and I think so many of us do consider meal times a transition, but how about we slow that down? Not every day, because again, that might be too overwhelming, but let's just pick a day. Pick a day of the week where you can actually slow down that meal time and really focus on the social interactions that arise during that meal time. And, you can practice setting the table with children, putting out napkins. If you can do cloth napkins, even better, because that really slows it down and kind of shows that, again, it's not disposable, it's something that continues. So these are 2 pictures from something that we did at school recently. we started doing tea parties where we invited individual children to come participate because we wanted to foster those relationships. We wanted to foster relationships across classrooms. So we started inviting children from each age group to come sit with a couple of teachers and have a tea party. And the goal wasn't to rush, it was to enjoy conversations, to notice what was happening around, and just to have those meaningful experiences with children that build our relationships. And this picture on the right, it's from we do a feast day in November with the entire school. So this is also a wonderful time to come together as a community where we slow down. So I recognize that many meal times, it's not a time for teachers to sit back because they're asking a lot of us. Open this. I need help with that. I need to go to the bathroom. I made a spill. I understand that. Um, that's another part of slowing down is accepting that sometimes things will feel kind of chaotic and just to go with it. Go with what the children are showing us is interesting to them in the moment. And so if you can't slow down every day for meal times, you can't ritualize meal times every day. I totally understand, but maybe consider, picking a Friday, maybe end the week on a slow note where you can come together, reflect on the week, and just enjoy each other's company instead of rushing through. And finally, grow a garden. So whether you have space indoors or outdoors, it doesn't matter. Growing a garden invites us to slow down because then we have to surrender to nature's pace. And so there's a wonderful lesson in there for us humans that we just have to slow down sometimes to the pace of plants. And to know that when we plant all these seeds, they will sprout at different times, and that their individual journey mirrors that of the children's. And so let's close our session here, which went by so fast. And let's just take a moment again to ground ourselves here. What is one way, excuse me, let me pull this up. Pardon me. Excuse me, Christine, can I move back a little bit? Okay. So I want us to focus on, remember, just to take that one first step to bring a slow practice into your program, into your classroom, over trying to overhaul everything because again, we don't want to be so overwhelmed that we don't even try. So just start with one thing. And to continue your self-reflective practice, think about how you live as a person, not just you as an educator, because your humanity matters and it's what grounds you as an educator. So to continue to have that self-reflective practice and to cultivate that self-compassion so that we can draw from our compassion and share with others. And to do those group reflections because I'm certain that if you were to take this back to your team, there will be a variety of opinions about what to do, even if we should do this, but to lean into that constructive friction because this matters. This conversation matters. Um, how we run school, how we run every school day matters for our children, and they have implications far beyond the early years. So let's start that conversation now because those of us working in early education, we're setting foundations. So let's start them off without accelerating everything. So thank you, Christine. So this is the last prompt I want to leave with you, and I'd love to see your responses in the chat. What's one way I can invite more slowness into my space?
I've been making notes while you've been sharing ideas.
I
So much.
can't see the chat, so I'm not sure if you're able to read off any responses or.
I am not sure if I see the answers until in the
Hmm.
poll, I see folks responding, but we've had so much great response in the chat, both about moments of that they were sharing, that participants were sharing about times when children were invited to slow down and notice and wonder. And then kind of your sense of kind of being more expansive and creating time for revisiting. Had a lovely side conversation about how folks have created space for children to return to work, space for works in progress, thoughts around being more fluid and supporting children as they think about their time and activities. A lot of really lovely co-construction.
Thank you. Thank you. And I love that. That shows me that we're willing to differentiate for our group of children, right? Because um, one size does not fit all. And so one slow practice might resonate with some, but not all. And that's okay. And I want us to be open to that. All right. Looks like everyone has responded. Thank you so much. I don't see the responses here, but I'm going to continue. I just have a couple more slides. I want to leave us with this. Flow is a gift, just like this beautiful sunflower you see before you. That I can certainly wish for the sunflower to bloom. I want it to bloom today rather than next week. But sometimes when we surrender to nature and nature's pace, which is the children's pace, and we wait for that beauty to unfold, we wait for the bloom, right? Delaying gratification isn't only for children. We wait to see that our seeds have bloomed and sprouted. It's really, really lovely. Adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. So I want us to leave with this. And here is where I want to hear some of the questions you have and see if we have some time to further discuss some slow practices.
Well, yeah. So please feel free to drop any questions either into our chat or the Q&A box. I think I see one in there now. All right, Barbara is asking additional suggestion for cues to slow down for adults that have a tendency to rush through their day-to-day activities. And then I'm just also going to share
Mm,
Amanda, and I think I saw a raised hand earlier. I don't have I can't unmute you, but you can drop your questions into the chat, and we would love to hear them, please.
okay, so Barbara's question, how do we add cues or think about cues that would help us to slow down the classroom?
For
So
adults.
one, oh, sorry, for the adults to slow down the classroom, right? So one thing I have noticed because we all have our smartphones and devices, and we're getting notifications all day long. Something I've done is turn off my notifications because that is amplifying my stress. Anytime I hear a ping, that completely stresses me out. And so something I've done personally is to remove those devices or turn off notifications because they are constant interruptions in my day. Um, I'm someone that feels like I'm a slave to time sometimes. I certainly, I'm one of those people that I hate being late. So I have to show up 15 minutes early, right? Or I feel that stress. And so something I remind myself is to build in that buffer time for myself so I don't walk into a situation feeling stressed and rushed already. So I don't know what everyone else does, but so that's what I do. I make sure that I build in lots of time beforehand so I'm prepared for whatever is coming next so that I'm not scrambling in the moment for things I need.
Wonderful. Amy, do you mind if I go ahead and share the evaluation QR
Sure.
code and then we can
Yes.
continue our conversation? There are
Yes.
some more uh, wonderful questions and responses. So, while we continue this conversation, do you guys see the evaluation QR code? Is that showing up on the screen share? Yes. Okay. And
Christine, I'm sorry, Christine. Can I saw a question here that I would love to respond to. Is that okay? Says, do you have a mantra type of thing you say when you catch yourself rushing? I do. So I wanted to share that. What I say to myself is, this is not an emergency. Something I say because I think, I don't want to rush to this next thing. So I say, this is not an emergency. I can still have a few moments before I go off to something else. So that I think that calms my nervous system when I remind myself that I'm safe. I am physically safe. This is something that I think adults have also done. It used to be our stress responses, a long time ago was so that we can avoid that animal who's trying to catch us and eat us. And now a lot of our stress is psychological, and we hang on to these things and we ruminate about the past and worry about the future. And so I say, this is not an emergency, to remind myself that it's okay to be where I am right now.
I think I might have been sharing.
Ah, thank you.
There we go. Hopefully now we see this code. So one of the questions, and I feel you spoke to the tensions in early childhood, and that is such a real thing. Um, how can we send this message to admin who feel pressure from the district? And district can mean so many things in early childhood, right? It could be administration, it could be QRIS, it could be um, family or policy or assessments, who feel pressure from the district to push children to do more.
I understand. I think that going to real classrooms provides a lot of insight for those administrators and folks who may not see the realities of a classroom. And so I invite my admins. I mean, I'm an admin now, but something I try to do is always to stay close to my teachers' experiences in the classrooms, because I never want to tell them how to do things if I don't know the reality of what they're going through day to day. And so maybe it's worth inviting someone to see how the day is, to move through the day with you, and inviting them to share how they might slow down the school day. I know that none of us are experts at any of this. It's just we're trying to figure things out, and I think inviting multiple perspectives might be helpful so that we're allies. Even if they don't understand quite yet, I think that they can understand that life has, it's moving at breakneck speed, and it's amplifying stress for all of us. I think that's something that will resonate, and starting from that and how we want to be advocates for children. And when we advocate for children, sometimes it will be inconvenient for us. Sometimes we can't get through all the checklists because we're prioritizing actual children's wellness and their present needs over these rules that we have to follow every day. So I do think it's important to speak up when something is not working, as long as we frame it in supporting children, right? And also supporting ourselves as educators, because if we burn out, then who's going to teach the children? And so we need to talk about that too.
Absolutely. Let's see. I feel like we had some other questions in the chat. Let's see. If folks are still looking for the evaluation, you can either use a QR code or we have dropped it in the chat. You will also receive it in the follow-up email since you joined us live. But the link in the chat should work. Let's see. Someone said, as a former scout leader, your lack of planning is not my emergency. Yes. So many great ideas. And I will also add, I will pull all of the responses from the
Mhm.
ways that one step that people offered as opportunities for creating space. I will compile those so that we can share that out in the email follow-up. But there were
Wonderful.
lovely things
Yeah.
in the chat as well.
So yeah, I hope this is merely an introduction to this topic, and that we'll continue this conversation now and add more voices. Because again, I certainly don't think this is only for educators. I think so many of us are just feeling the pressure of modern life. Um, Something I didn't mention at the beginning, but in 2024, some of you might be aware of this, but the US Surgeon General put out an advisory, and it's called Parents Under Pressure. And so when the US Surgeon General puts out an advisory like that, it's a matter of public health. And so I think that we can point to that and show parents that too. Show them that they're also stressed out and they also need relief. And that way we can pull them into this conversation too.
Well, well, thank you all for joining us, Amy. Thank you so much for your
My
time,
pleasure.
care, and I just feel so restored to sharing this time with you. I'm really inspired by this invitation to bring this to even my context, not being in a classroom anymore. Oh,
Yes,
I'm
of
hearing
course.
folks would love a follow-up, and what a great ground
Ah,
opportunity. What a treat.
thank you so much. Would I be able to show my final slide in case anyone wants to
Sure.
connect with me?
Yes.
Um, s- Pardon me, where did it go? I have to find it again. Okay, guys. Uh-oh.
And we can share
Hmm.
these as well in the follow-up.
Yes, actually, you know what? That's okay then. I don't think I could do that now. I don't know what happened to it. But I do want to invite everyone to connect with me through my website. You can find me there easily, theworkatplay.com, or simply email me, Amy at theworkatplay.com with any of these questions that we didn't get a chance to answer today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.